Let's talk about how you name and write formulas for covalent compounds. Since the rules are different for covalent compounds and ionic compounds, the first thing you have to do is determine which it is. A covalent compound is made up of two nonmetals, and you should be able to look at the periodic table and tell if they're metals or nonmetals. And the way you do this is this side over here is made up of nonmetals. Everything to the right of this dark stair-step line. This side over here is metals. So you can see that most of the periodic table is metals. Now touching this line, like boron and aluminum and silicon, are what we would call metalloids. And they have some properties of metals and some properties of nonmetals. The one exception to this rule is hydrogen. Hydrogen's over here, but it's still a nonmetal. So once we know that it's a covalent compound, how do we name it? The rule is that we use prefixes to tell how many. The only exception is we don't use mono on the first word. We also change the ending of the second word to IDE. So oxygen becomes oxide. We don't just tack on IDE, it's not oxygenide. We change the ending. And there's only about 10 nonmetals we're going to use, so you'll start seeing it and you'll pick up where to put that IDE in. So these are the 10 prefixes we're going to use. And they probably look familiar to you from math classes and geometry and stuff of that nature. So for 1, we use the prefix mono. For 2, we use the prefix di. For 3, we use tri. For 4, we use tetra. 5, we use penta. 6 is hexa. 7 is hepta. 8 is octa. 9 is nona. And 10 is deca. And hopefully you'll start remembering these, but keep this list of prefixes on hand if you need it. Now that we know the rules for naming covalent compounds, let's use them and do some practice. In this first one, we have BF3. We know that B is boron, and if you don't know your symbols in your element names, then keep a periodic table handy. And we can tell by the fact that there's no number here that there is 1 boron. The prefix for 1 is mono, but that was our exception, wasn't it? That we never use mono on the first word. So the first word is just boron. The F stands for fluorine, and because there are 3 of them, we would use the prefix tri. We also know that we need to change the ending of the second word to IDE. So fluorine becomes fluoride, and we get boron trifluoride. Our second formula is N2O. The N stands for nitrogen. The symbol that we use for 2 is di. So our first word is dinitrogen. The second symbol is O, which is for oxygen. And because there's no subscript written, it's an understood 1. So it will be mono. We also know we need to change the ending to IDE. So it becomes monoxide. Because oxygen starts with a vowel, with that O, a lot of times the last vowel on the prefix is dropped off. So instead of monoxide, it's monoxide. I won't take off if you leave it on there, but I just wanted you to know it could be like that. So the second name is dinitrogen monoxide. Next we have CS2. C stands for carbon. There's only 1 of them, but we don't use mono on the first word. So the first word is just carbon. S is for sulfur. We use di to mean 2, and we change the ending to IDE. So it becomes disulfide. Carbon, disulfide. Look at the fourth one, the P2O5. Think for a minute about how you would name that one. P stands for phosphorus, and we would use di to mean two, so the first word would be diphosphorus. The O is oxygen. The prefix that means 5 is penta, and we know we changed the ending to IDE, so it becomes pentoxide. We get diphosphorus pentoxide. Take a minute and look at the last one and see if you can come up with it. C stands for carbon. The prefix that we use for 6 is hexa, so we have hexacarbon. F is fluorine, which becomes fluoride, and the prefix for 8 is octa, so we have hexacarbon octafluoride. Let's talk about how we write the formulas. You're just going to read the name and use the prefixes to tell you how many to write with the subscripts. So let's do some practice. Carbon tetrafluoride. The symbol for carbon is C. Because there's no prefix, we know there's just one. The second one, tetrafluoride. The symbol for fluorine is F, and tetra tells you 4. So we have CF4. For the next one, hexaoxygen, known as sulfide. Hexaoxygen tells you 6 oxygen, O6. Monosulfide tells you 9 sulfur, so S9. So O6, S9. Silicon dioxide. Silicon tells you just one silicon, Si. Dioxide tells you 2 oxygens, so SiO2. Take a minute and look at the next one and try to come up with the formula on your own. Diboron tells you B2. Tetrabromide tells you 4 bromines, so Br4. So if you said B2, Br4, got it right. Let's try one more. Chlorine dioxide. So chlorine just tells you Cl. Dioxide tells you 2 oxygens. So you should have ClO2. Naming and writing formulas for covalent compounds is easy if you remember those prefixes and if you remember to not use mono on that first word. Make sure you study your prefixes before you take your test.